Okay.
So, there's this crazy thing that happened this week, Brian Wang.
Yeah.
Did you know that Tesla on Friday was down 10 cents?
No, I did not know that.
And did you know for the week it was up 85 cents?
Wow. It's swinging like crazy.
But ending up going nowhere.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
been quite a wild week, but it ended up with nothing at the end of the day. So a key component, I mean, everybody's got their opinion of why Tesla's sales were down last year, why Tesla sales are down in the first month of this year. I can't tell you how many dozens of headlines I've read that it's because of Elon, it's because the Europeans don't like Elon, blah, blah, blah. Just because the car is no longer that interesting. Oh, a big reason why it's down, we've talked about it over and over again, is because because people were
Refresh Model Y.
waiting for the Model Y. It was a
Yeah.
Osborning of
Refreshing
the
it. Yeah.
Model
Ramp
Y.
it out. Yeah.
Absolutely. But the other big one is, interest rates. And
Mm.
it's impacting all the car companies. They're all down. That
Right.
was the big news this morning on retail sales was automobile sales were down.
Right.
So how do we get those interest rates down, Brian?
Well, most CEOs, most companies, just that would be interest rates, inflation. That's the macroeconomic environment, and
Yeah.
you can't deal with it. You just have to adjust your plans as they happen, unless, unless you're someone like Elon Musk, who can, you know, buy a social media company, help a president win an election, get control of the, top economy in the world, the United States government, and then you can um, totally revamp the federal government spending, and then you would impact inflation and interest rates. So you get control of macro if you did enough of a job there. So
And so if you got a control of the US federal government and somehow you were managed, no, not the government, but you were in a position, you were actually, the job you're given
yeah,
is to reduce federal spending. That federal spending would then result, if you reduce the federal spending, it results in a reduced deficit.
yeah,
And a reduced deficit, that has an impact on interest rates, right?
right, right. So because you're funding the government, if they bring in less money in revenues. So last year it was $4.9 trillion in revenue that they brought in, 2.4 trillion individual income tax, 1.7 trillion payroll, a half a trillion corporate tax, and then other things. So, but then they spent 6.75 trillion. So then they had a negative 1.8 trillion deficit. So that 1.8 trillion is funded by, bonds and T-bills and debt. So then you have this demand, supply and demand, right? So my demand is 1.8 trillion more, then the cost, in this case, the interest rate goes up. So by
Yeah, and
reducing
so
that a huge amount,
but the Biden administration learned their lesson, right? They learned their lesson. So starting October 1, the new fiscal year starts October 1. They learned their lesson and they started spending less in the first 4 months of this year, right?
no, they did not. For the last few months last year and the month of this year, they actually accelerated their spending. They were on pace for adding $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. So it was on going on pace to do $3 trillion worth of debt at the pace, that they're going at.
So just on the budget, if I remember the number right, just on the budget, they overspent $411 billion more than they took. Well, they took in for they increased spending by 411 billion
Yeah,
compared to last year,
right.
compared to up another 411 billion. But they had more revenues, lots,
Yeah,
11 billion more revenues.
right, right.
So they didn't apparently learn their lesson. So now we've
No,
got a new administration. The new
right,
administration said enough.
right,
Enough. Yeah. And
right.
so if they can do what they say they're going to do, and they're obviously getting a lot of clapback from various
A lot of
Democrat
people. Yeah,
people, folks that some of them might be losing some income that
kickbacks
we
or
don't
money in both
really want to talk
contracts.
about.
Right.
There might be some graft and corruption going on, or
Yeah,
maybe they're just losing constituent money.
Mhm.
And that's fair. Okay,
Yeah.
if you've got a bunch of these companies that are getting this nasty money, this are just too much being spent, and
Right.
it's in your district, you might want to be, wanting to hold on to it. I live just a couple of blocks away from an Air Force base.
Yeah.
It was shut down 15 years ago, and it didn't help Riverside at all. Did not
Right.
have that Air Force base anymore. So, there are issues in terms of local congressmen trying to hold on to that kind of stuff.
Right. Right. But if the kind of I don't know if it's prisoner's dilemma or something like that, is that if everyone keeps their own pet project, right, which is what everyone's been doing, right?
Right.
It's like, congressmen go, I must have this project. That you get the markups, the line items, everything is thrown in. And if everyone does it, all, 500 or whatever
500,
congressmen are
yeah.
talking their thing, then all the senators talking their thing, then that's you get an extra $2 trillion worth of spending, right? That extra stuff that should be in there, but because everyone needs to, well, he got it, so I get it. I get a bridge, you get a bridge. It's like all that stuff ends up happening. And then the whole economy suffers, right? That's why, well, why is interest rates so high? Why is inflation so high? It's because we all think so we have to all collectively say, okay, we'll give it all this extra stuff up. Everything goes down. And then instead of paying, if you're going to pay $10,000, $20,000 for individual income tax, if the spending went way down, theoretically you could then cut income taxes, and then you wouldn't have to pay that amount. So then instead of getting your base and getting whatever indirect money because other people are spending stuff, you would get actual lower taxes.
So what we're sitting at right now is we had the number that everybody looks at is the 10-year bond. The 10-year bond is sitting, I think at the end of today, it was still at just under 4.5%. And if we're honest with everybody, 4.5% over the last 100 years is kind of normal. It's kind of in the middle. But over the last 20 years, Americans have gotten used to, like 2.75 or something. So it's a lot higher. And that increase has resulted in people being kind of getting sticker shock.
Mhm.
Because what happens, okay, so one of the things that I think a lot of people don't think about, and Brian, I don't know if you and I have ever talked about this before, but every family has a budget.
Mhm.
Okay. And now you can aggregate those budgets and you can look
Mhm.
at the national budget.
Right.
75 years ago, a huge percentage of the budget went into groceries. A huge percentage of the budget went into clothing. A huge percentage of the budget went into one car. Is all anybody could afford. And slowly but surely over the years, it got, two cars, and then price of food came down. Well, that meant people had more money to spend on housing, and they had more money to spend on college for their kids, and they had more. So those prices went up because people could bid up those prices because they had more budget left over.
Yeah.
Along comes these low interest rates, and now all of a sudden you're paying on your mortgage, you're paying less money out of your budget for interest rate. Okay. You
Mhm.
can pay more money out of your budget for principal. So as the interest rate goes down, you can pay more money for the house. This
Right.
is just kind of normal stuff. If the interest rate goes down on the car, you can pay more money for the car.
Mhm.
So
Right.
in the United States, we have these ridiculously expensive cars, massively huge cars. The rest of the world kind of laughs and goes, "Why do you need those giant cars and those
Right.
huge homes?"
Right.
Well, because we were living in a crazy interest rate time.
Mhm.
Well, now the interest rates have popped back up again, and it's hurting the car industry, and it's really hurting the housing industry.
Right.
So if we can get those at this point, we have a choice, I guess. We can buy
Mhm.
smaller houses, we can buy
Mhm.
smaller cars, we can buy less expensive cars and less expensive houses, or we can try to get the interest rates back down.
Mhm.
It seems like the second one is a little easier.
Right. Right. So the interest rates affect everything throughout the economy. And then there's also what you mentioned. The thing is, you can't really switch to small houses that easily because you have 100 million or 150 million homes.
Oh,
They're
sorry
already
about that.
built. You're adding 5 million or destroying 5 million. So there's a bit of swap out, at the construction and deconstruction level. But that means 95% of it stayed the same year after year. It would take many, many years for that to turn over and to resize. Just like going from 1,000 square feet homes in the 70s to 2,000, 2,500 square feet homes today. It took you 2 to 4 decades to achieve that shift, right?
Right.
So if we want to reverse that, it would not be that easy to do that. It would take time to do that. So you could have multiple families inside of one property,
Right.
but that densification would mess you up. You would suddenly have demand, overall demand drop, and that whole supply demand thing come back and bite you, and then the real estate prices collapse. So there's the other unintended, or the reality of what it takes to shift from one thing to another. Lowering interest rates, besides helping lowering inflation and then lowering interest rates, besides having this overall good effect on the economy, is also, for the United States government, we do have $37 trillion, $38 trillion worth of debt already. So the interest payments on that last year were like $680 billion. So if you were to could succeed with DOGE for efficiency, cut things back, get interest rates to go in half, then you'd be at $350 billion. You'd save $300 billion of some goal of, say, a trillion or 2 trillion. It'd be a huge factor if you could, especially do it sustainably, right?
Right.
Because you said that, for the last 20 years, we were at 2.75, right? 2.7 versus the 4.5. There's some structural demographic reasons why the interest rates went down, was because, baby boomers, retirement, the certain large population, boomers reaching peak earnings and that kind of stuff. So that demographic, where people are in the life cycle of their careers and how much of savings, that is something that factors into the interest rate demand overall.
And then, like Elon Musk said, if we can get those treasury bills down to, 2.5, 2.75 again, they should have 50-year bonds.
Right.
Forget this 20 and 30-year bonds. Just put it all in 50s.
Right.
No short term at all. I think there's some reasons for the short term bonds that are probably necessary, but overall, it would be a great idea to put them into super long term bonds and just and have the government have the benefit of those small coupons.
Which assumes that you're keeping your financial act together for 50 years. Right. It assumes things don't go crazy.
Well, but then the bond, all that happens is the bond price goes up or down. It doesn't impact the treasury still paying out the same amount of interest.
I'm just saying that if you convert it to all long debt, right, then if you have 10 good years of management and then suddenly you get back to crazy spending again and all that stuff, and then things could still blow up, right? And yes. I think you still have to have things stable where everything's working for that. It's like, okay, I have a 30-year mortgage, I'm paying it off over 30 years, everything's going wonderful, and then I lose my job 10 years in,
and
right?
You pay that.
It's pay that. But then if I don't never get the job back, I could suddenly not be able to pay. I have to lose my house. So it's
All right, so we have the DOGE group in there, Elon Musk heading it up. I've been asking the question for a few days, Brian. Maybe I already asked you. I don't remember. Do you think that as DOGE is successful, it will help Elon's reputation? Because right now there's a lot of people that have hate Elon on their lips even faster than they have hate Trump. I mean, Trump's numbers are up like 54% right now. He's at 54%.
There was a Rasmussen poll that says Elon, I think, at 53 or 55%. So Elon is
improving,
not majority unpopular. He is still popular despite the noise of the legacy media saying that everyone hates him because they're making all these loud noises that they do, but that's not the case. Because there's so many what they call 80-20 issues, where 80% of people want most of the illegal immigrants deported, especially violently. They want crime to be enforced. There's 80-20, 70-30 type things. So there is broad support for what's happening, especially because they're choosing to go out with things that are super popular, right? So um, there is still majority support despite, again, the misinformation from certain reporting.
Right. In fact, I even saw polls where other polls where he was much lower than that, but it could be, I don't know, but some of the polling might be a little odd,
Wrong.
a little
Right,
rigged,
right.
a
Because
little
the polls were wrong for the election as well.
it's so wrong. And
Yeah,
nobody's going to be looking over their shoulders on an Elon Musk poll like they would be on a presidential poll, so you could
yeah.
get away with really bad stats.
Right.
Uh,
But for me, in terms of like the ultimate top engineer, so Elon says he's going to work for 4 months, heads down, December 24, making these fixes. And, they're hitting each agency, they're going to the Pentagon the next few days. They went to education, started going to education. Education, I think, at $80 billion. And there are ways to, plans where you could completely eliminate that $80 billion of Department of Education spend. And for people who say, well, what happened to the Department of Education? You're not getting rid of teachers, right? Because all the teachers in education, high schools, universities, that all existed in the late 70s, when Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education, right? And then we were number one ranked nation then, as Donald Trump has pointed out, we're now 40th, right? So we dropped way down. You added all these administrators, right? But they're not helping with actual education, right? And so the plan would be to
they're hurting actual education.
hurting education, right? Is to what needs to be done, administratively, other things, you push it down to the states, which already have departments of education in California and Texas. Every state has their administrative layer, but it doesn't have to have a redundant layer on at the national level. So they say 250 to $500 billion from the government accounting office. So the accounting done years ago, last year and every year, says, hey, we have this huge amount of fraud and waste and other things. So it's just that no one was successful, despite some previous attempts, to get at all that fraud and waste. And then there's these agencies, U.S. AID, the Agency of International Development, and Department of Education, and then many others. There's like 500 agencies you can go
Right.
for. So there's getting to that $1 trillion seems very doable. And Elon and Trump have said that getting to $1 trillion of cuts per year, which, if it got to 1.2, that would be half of individual income tax at 2.4.
Right.
So, and every time you take out 240 billion, that's 10% less individual income tax you could theoretically need. So by cutting 240, which we're already, on the DOGE tracker, some of them say 80 or 100 billion, once we cut some of the things, easily at 240 billion, that 10% is what would fund no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security. All those promises would then be funded, right?
Right.
Renewing the 2017 middle tax reduction act. So these cuts, the more successful they are, the less taxes we need to take. And then those things, according to all the economic studies, would increase economic growth.
And a huge percentage, I'm just doing this off the cuff. I've never thought about this until this minute, but a huge percentage of the income tax that comes in, the personal income tax, comes in from people that make more than $400,000 a year, right?
Right.
So
yeah, 90% of that.
I think Bernie Sanders would be okay if we eliminated, just took everything under 400,000 and said no more income tax and only tax people over 400,000. We'd still get a huge percentage of what we're getting now, and it would be a true middle class tax cut.
Right. So you would need to get, I think, down to at least the $500 billion cut level if you wanted to do that kind of cut. But it appears, like I said, just be doable. And then if you have done that, say, in the summer or the fall of this year, okay, we've cut 500 billion, 600 billion on the way to cutting $1 trillion. And then, in the first 3 months, they announced, they put through the renewing the previous tax cut, and then do the no tax on pensions and Social Security, and then no tax on tax and tips. So that was the first 3 months. And then in 4 to 6 months, they do, and now we cut even more, and now we can eliminate taxes on people making less than 400,000, 500,000, right? The popularity then of like, holy crap, it happened.
Yeah.
Holy crap, it happened.
Yeah.
The popularity of Trump and Elon would go up the roof. And all the people who stood in the way, now making noise, saying, don't do it, don't do it. Hey, they're going to do terrible things. People would say that was incredibly good. And so then the popularity would go up a huge amount.
And even the folks that are making the 400,000 and up that have that kind of tax, I'm sure there's ways to simplify that a little bit, which would make it a lot easier on those folks. But let's just say maybe you and I have some experience either now or in the past of making something on that level. And, I think those people would not be that unhappy if they had to continue to pay. This kind of built into it's built into their budget. They have plenty. It's not like they're going to say, "Oh no, you're not going to cut mine too." I don't think they'd be that sad.
Right. I think they're used to it because it's not like I'm constantly carrying this burden anyway. The fact that some other people got deburdened, it's everyone understands what's going on. The other thing is that if you have that money, higher amounts, and you're doing some business, right?
Yeah.
Then the fact that the people who have less money have more to spend means you will get more money, right?
Business.
You want the growth to happen because you're going to disproportionately benefit from the new growth, right? So I think one huge benefit though is the simplification you talked about.
Yeah.
That they say they want to deregulate as part of this thing. There's no reason to have a library full of tax code, right? Like the tax code stuff, the complication, like I'm a smart guy. I must have software to do my taxes. There's no way. And I've also used other people, experts to do it, right? In Canada, in Hong Kong, and Taiwan, where I also lived for times, I always could do my own taxes. In Canada, it'd be like a 30-page thing, and I do my taxes. I could, some figuring stuff like that. I could do it by hand. I could fill it all in and then send it in. In Hong Kong and Taiwan, postcard, a little postcard. Here's how much I made, my salary. Sign, send it in. Done. Right. And then I think in Taiwan, it was like I did one for 2 years. I was like, I fill it in once, and for this year and next year is good. I'll do one in 2 years, right? So the code can be insanely simple, right? Because for people who don't know, like there's overall tracking of like how much goes to tax, and it's like 21%, 20% of the total GDP or whatever it is, right? It's very, very standard, and you cannot increase the tax rate beyond some level. It will still stick at 21%, 22%, because people find ways around it. You're just increasing the cheat. They cheat. You find ways to work the system because you're going to hire smarter accountants than the bureaucrats who created the tax code, right? Yes. You create the tax code and then figure out how to game the system, right? So then you're stuck at 20%. So all the activity around trying to get more is utterly meaningless, right? Because you're never going to get more than 21%. It can't be done because even if something's super effective, now I can get 50. The people leave. That's what happens in Germany, all the other places. I have some super effective thing. I'm going to get your money. They say, well, screw you. I'm gone. Right. So again, you cannot get more than 20%. So why try? Why don't you just say it's 20 flat, it's 15 flat? If you make the cuts 15 flat, everything grows so much faster. So simplifying the code is just one, recognizing reality. You're not going to get the money. All the grandstanding talk about I'm going to tax the millionaires, the billionaires, they have private jets. They can leave. Right. They do that. All the billionaires leave, right? And you think I'm going to hunt them, and then, it just becomes the game of like, I will block you with my money. You're going to try and get me with money. All this money gets spent and gets scammed away, as we've just seen. It's just again, fraud and waste that's occurring.
All right. Last thing on this subject, we also have this whole tariff situation, which is a big deal. It's become a bigger deal every single day.
Yeah.
And I know you've done a little analysis.
Yeah.
Um, Based on what Trump is talking about now, with some significant tariffs here and there, but with reciprocal tariffs elsewhere, what do you think is realistic in terms of tariff income compared to now? So we got X amount now. How much more do you think we could get that might pay down some more of that debt?
So the tariffs right now in the United States are about $80 billion per year, last year.
Okay.
So that's off of, I think, about $3 to $4 trillion in trade. I think you
Okay.
have like $1 trillion in trade with Canada, $1 trillion in trade with Mexico. Those are the biggest partners, 600 billion with China. On down the road, you get to about $4 trillion worth of total trade.
Okay.
So then if you had 10% across the board,
Mhm.
then you look at $400 billion,
Okay.
right? So that'd be a ballpark of, I think, of something reasonable and possible to get. Because if you go up to like 20%, again, it's then you're going to start, okay, instead of, we drop from 4 trillion to 3.5, and then we're dropping to 2.5 because you're saying, you're not saying I'm going to get this money. I'm saying I'm going to force you to make the business decision to switch.
Right. Right.
Right. So in that, I think $300 to $400 billion is very doable, maybe 500 billion.
Okay. All right. So that would be significant. That would be
Yeah.
that'd be another big chunk. And
Yeah.
that could get us down to what Elon and Trump have just been talking about in terms of actually getting to a balanced budget.
Right.
So
The other thing though is that that 300 $400 billion would not be steady state,
right.
because over 2 or 3 years, the effect that Trump is going for is move the factories from there to here. So that could take 2 years, right?
But
So
it's a limit. There's a limit to that. You only
Right.
have so many employees here. You only
Right.
have so many, that's gonna limit out. And so
Right.
things will switch around. What I think you said it. You were the first one to say it.
Yeah.
What Trump is trying to do is reset the
Yeah.
whole world economic system
Right.
away from this US as mommy,
Yeah.
codependent,
Yeah.
and let everybody stand on their own 2 feet,
Right.
and we'll have, fairness with
Right.
the trade policy. Yeah.
Right. So I think it is a significant amount. So if you add the $300 billion, of your 1.8
Right.
trillion in deficit last year,
Uh-huh.
300 billion, that's close to 20% of that, right?
So
16%.
then the way I understand what Trump and Elon are talking about is we've got the reduction based on just reducing the size of government.
Yep.
We've got the reduction in the size of government reduces the overall amount the Treasury needs. Therefore, interest rates goes down, meaning that the government now pays less interest because they're not paying as much interest on their own debt. So
Right.
the deficit goes down. You have a ratchet effect.
Right.
The economy is stimulated and grows faster than it would grow otherwise, which
Right.
means that corporate tax revenues increase.
Yeah.
So you get more money coming in from corporate tax revenues.
Right.
Then if you get another 300 billion coming in from tariffs, you could be getting close, and all of that, of course, the coming in from the tariffs, reducing the debt would also reduce interest rates.
Right.
So you have a kind of a combination of things, a little here,
Yeah.
a little
Virtuous circle, everything's helping each other.
you might be
everything's
able to
building.
get close to that balanced budget. Now, Ray
Right.
Dalio says he'd be happy with 3% deficit.
Right.
And Ray Dalio is a fairly smart guy. He just bought more Tesla. He bought some Tesla stock.
Yeah. He bought like 60 some billion or something, 62 billion, 62 million, right?
60 million. Yeah.
60 million.
68 million. Something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he thinks 3% will be fine, but now they're shooting for maybe a balanced budget. That'd be crazy.
Right. And those would be huge things. I would think, my guess is that they will balance the budget over 2 or 3 years. That even if they could hit the 1.8 trillion cuts and blah, 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 to close that gap, that they would prefer to run some deficit in order to, but far less, in order to give a bigger tax cut, to pull forward the tax cuts, so that one, they're more popular, but to stimulate even more growth.
Right.
Because they're not going to be, there's more votes in I cut your taxes by 30%, 40% than there is I balance the budget versus
Budget, yeah.
combined with, I cut the deficit to a manageable 500 billion. That goes to Ray Dalio saying 3% is good. 3% on an economy of $30 trillion would be $900 billion, right?
Right.
So cutting deficit in half, Ray Dalio is happy,
Yeah.
right? And they're perfectly sustainable because if your growth in debt is lower than your GDP growth, then you're fine.
Yeah, and there's actually some arguments that have been made forever that some debt is good.
Right.
So you have people who rely on their treasury bonds as their very substantial retirement guaranteed income that they don't want to have any fears about not being able to get. So you don't want to necessarily completely get your government to the place where there's none of that bond income available.
Right, but I've been, in Canada in the 90s or something like that, 80s, 90s, where they did substantial debt deficit reduction. They were forced to do that because unlike the U.S. being reserve currency, they could not, the markets would not let them have that. So it was not like a choice. They were like, we had to roll that back.
Right.
But they went from 60, 70% debt to GDP ratio down to 30. And I think they've come back up since then. But they did a substantial move over 8-10 years. So you can make this kind of ratchet down. So because besides slowing the growth, you want the overall debt to GDP ratio to get back to 60% instead of 110 or something like that. Now you want to get it down to something reasonable.
Right. All right. Well, I think we've solved all the problems of the world, Brian Wang.
Yes.
We're going to have a second show this weekend where we're going to be talking about the complete restructuring of war.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's actually on the table. So
Right.
I'm looking forward to having that conversation with you. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you.